Morning, everyone. Welcome to the Liverpool Development Update. I'm Sarah Townsend, editor of Place Northwest. I hope you've got yourself a coffee and enjoyed some networking in the other room. This is our second event hosted through Remo, and it allows us to offer what you might term a virtual reality version of our popular live events. We're confident that Remo is a great step towards a more authentic conference experience while staying online and keeping everyone safe. So we'll be using this for all of our autumn events at Place Northwest and our sister publication, Place Tech. I'd like to thank our sponsors today, Kia, Lexington, Satplan, Caro Developments, and Clearfibre by Telcom. We've got almost 200 registered guests today, so it looks set to be a great opportunity for discussion and interaction. In terms of format, there will be two halves with networking in between. In the first half, we'll have a panel. Then in the second half, we'll have a presentation and another panel. There will also be half an hour's networking at the end, so you can continue making connections, doing business, or just getting to grips with the new technology. The networking room is where you can join tables and video chat with other guests, moving around by double-clicking on a table to meet other people. You can take conversations private too, if you wish. Just see if there's a table of two free on either side of you and suggest to your new or old friend that they meet you there, for example, on table 26. You both then double click on the table and off you go. There's private messaging if you want to swap numbers or suggest times for follow-up meetings and so on. And we've also included a short video guide to getting the most out of the networking, which you can find at the top of your screen to the left of the speaker's green room. You can also click on the sponsors' logos if you want to find out more about them. There's a bit of information there. Another tip, you can drag the floor plan around and zoom in and out to help you locate what you need. If you haven't already, it's quite useful to create your own profile so that when someone clicks on you, they can see exactly who you are, and it helps you to work the room as you would do one of our physical conferences. Don't forget to pose questions to our panelists as well using the Q&A button. We will weave them into our panel discussions and hope to get through as many as possible. Remo is a new format for us. We're excited to be using it, and we believe it presents more user-friendly and authentic opportunities to get involved, rather than sitting back and having a flat video experience. But please do give us feedback after the event, because we always want to improve things. Moving on to today's topic, we're here to get under the skin of the opportunities and challenges the Liverpool market presents. Development in the city is gathering pace, with schemes underway at King's Dock, Prince's Dock, Central Dock in Liverpool Waters, projects in the Knowledge Quarter, New Islington, Duke Street, Pall Mall and the Business District, and the next phase of work at the Baltic Triangle, to list just a few. A couple of city centre projects won funding last month from Whitehall's 26 million Getting Building Fund, including Capital and Centric's Littlewoods revamp, and a research and development centre from the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. There are also some projects facing bumps in the road, such as Everton's proposed stadium at Bramley-Moore Dock, which may have to be called in by the government. More on that in our second panel, which will focus on heritage issues in Liverpool. I'm very sorry to say that Tony Reeves, Chief Executive of the City Council, can no longer attend due to urgent commitments related to the local COVID situation, and he sends his sincere apologies. So without further ado, let's kick off. Our first panel discussion will ask, what's in the pipeline for Liverpool? I'm pleased to welcome to the stage our speakers, John Moffat, developer at Capital and Centric, Mark Kitts, Chief Executive at Liverpool Foundation Homes, Leah Stewart, Director at Civic Engineers, Stephen Calperthwaite, Principal and Managing Director at Avison Young Liverpool, and Mark Askham, Director of Estate Management at Liverpool John Moores University. Please could our speakers turn on your cameras and microphones if you haven't already. Welcome everyone.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks everyone there.
Morning. Good morning.
Morning everyone.
Hi.
Okay, to start us off, I'm going to ask panelists to give us a brief overview of their main piece of Liverpool work right now. So John is leading capital and centric studios redevelopment, which is certainly getting a lot of attention right now. John, where is the scheme at and what's the next task for you?
Well, I think over the last month or so, you've probably seen a lot of the things that we've been doing in the background kind of come to fruition. So about a month ago, we were confirmed for a £15 million grant from the Get Back or Get Building fund. And then earlier this month, we obviously announced that the deal with John Moores as our second anchor tenant. And there's been a lot of hard work. I can see Mark nodding. There's a long road to get there, and there was a lot of work that was done in the background, and we couldn't talk about it. And I think there's a lot more going on in the background again at the moment that we can't talk about, but which will come to fruition fairly shortly. And obviously, those two elements, a significant element of funding and another anchor tenant, are huge steps forward for the scheme. And we're hoping that we'll be on site before the end of December, although that's, it's tight, but we're doing everything to get it on site. So the next key landmark for us is diggers rolling on.
Brilliant. Lots of exciting stuff to look forward to, John. Yeah. I wonder if you can sort of expand a bit by saying sort of, I guess, what were the sort of key hurdles to bring it to this moment right now?
As in
you've overcome?
That we've overcome.
Yeah.
They've been fairly numerous. I think for us, the critical element was securing Twickenham Studios as our anchor tenant. That was the critical element. If you look at Paddington Village, clearly the deal with the Royal College of Physicians was the key driver there. It's the same for us. That's an inward investment of 84,000 square feet, pre-let to probably one of the best in the private sector. Twickenham recently won an Oscar and numerous other awards. That they are one of the best in the industry at what they do. They're the oldest studio operator in the UK, been going over 100 years. And so for us, that was the kind of critical part of the scheme that then brought in the other elements. I know Mark wouldn't have been kind of so keen to kind of get involved in the scheme had there not been that anchor tenant there, and not just an anchor tenant, but a world-class anchor tenant as well. Brilliant.
And of course, yes, because Liverpool John Moores University is the latest tenant to have signed up. And you've got I can't remember how much space you've got left to lease there, John.
Well, we've let about 160,000 square feet. We've got about 100,000 still to go.
Okay, brilliant. Great. Okay, well, yes, lots of exciting things in store there. Leah from Civic Engineers, you're working on an overarching spatial strategy for Liverpool, including concepts like active travel and sustainable design. Can you tell us more about this and why the city needs it?
Yeah, this is a piece of work commissioned by Liverpool City Council, and it's a public realm strategy, which is going to be adopted by the council as a supplementary planning document. So it's something that developments across the city will have to take account of. And it's prompted by climate change, actually, primarily really responding to that. Because, in order to reduce our carbon footprint, we're going to have to change the way we travel, reduce emissions from transport, actually, which is a really, really major contributor. And that's something that cities across the UK are having to tackle. So this document looks at how we make our infrastructure and our systems work better, so that we get better movement opportunities for more sustainable movement. We can be more climate responsible. We can make our public space work harder in terms of providing better biodiversity and better amenity, more trees, manage our surface water in a more clever way, and really excellent high quality public realm, which can have a fantastic impact in the way that cities prosper. So we've been drawing on case studies for places like Walthamstow, Waltham Forest in London, where they've really focused on not just the big ticket kind of gorgeous, huge public realm improvements, but also some very small interventions that just make it so that the easiest way to get from A to B is by walking or cycling. And that can have a fantastic impact on people's health and well-being, and also obviously the environment as well. So it's sort of a no-brainer when you put it in terms of public health. Who wouldn't want a healthier, happier city? And that's something that Liverpool needs to be as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Leah. Your audio is slightly going in and out. We can hear you. I think I'm right in saying, but it's a little bit shaky. So maybe if you stay close to your computer.
Okay,
that'd be great.
I'll do that. If I come a bit closer.
Yes. Yes.
Really big view of my head.
Excellent.
Okay.
Yeah. Excellent.
Okay.
Excellent.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. Okay, coming to you, Mark Askem from Liverpool John Moores University. So obviously we've just talked about how you've agreed to lease 75,000 square foot of the Littlewoods building, and this will serve as a base for the university's film and TV higher education courses. But this is, of course, just one strand of the large-scale estates revamp that the university is planning and progressing. Can you tell us what your priorities are for this, Mark? What's next in your intro?
Certainly. Well, there's quite a lot at the moment. Certainly the Littlewood studio piece is very exciting, and John's quite right. It's been a long time in coming, and it's been great to be able to announce that. It's a good bit of news for everybody, I think, in seeing that move forward as a key scheme for the city. The other key areas we're looking at, we have just revamped our estate strategy, which is looking at growth in several areas. One is around the business school, Faculty of Health, sports science, but also other areas such as maritime, astrophysics, and looking at how teaching is going to change going forward with the degree apprenticeships and part-time courses. So there's an awful lot of change on the agenda for us at the moment. Top of the list at the moment is around the business school, and certainly Copperas Hill, or Upper Central, as it's also known in different areas. And we're looking very closely at how we can expand our business school. It's done exceptionally well over the last couple of years, but it's constrained by the building it's currently in that it shares with the Screen School, which is a Redlands building. So we're looking at a new build development on Copperas Hill. So we're just finishing off the student life building, the sports building, which are actually looking really good and should come online in January. Along with a huge amount of public realm, which links in with what Leah was saying about connectivity and trying to create new routes through the city from the station up to the Knowledge Quarter. But the site we're looking at is on the corner of Copperas Hill and Hawke Street, hopefully bringing forward around 200,000 square foot of accommodation. We'd probably look to take about half of that, with the other half being a commercial development. So we're working very closely with the City Council about how the whole Upper Central master plan and SRF it kind of gets delivered. We see this as very much as being a key part of the catalyst of bringing that forward. And we're looking at development partners at the moment of how we can bring that forward as quickly as possible, with the view that, we'd very much like to be on site with that as soon as we finish on our other buildings at the end of this year and start continuing building that whole phase out. There's another phase to that after that, phase 3, for us on land that we own, which would also be, again, a mixture of commercial opportunities and land occupational space for ourselves. But aside from that, we're also looking at, say, sports science, bringing forward some sports facilities within the city centre to add to the facilities we have at Byron Street. And around Faculty of Health, certainly, now that the flyovers have come down, it's really created opportunities where we're already investing in and around Tide Barn Street at the moment. And the land that's become available around the flyovers has actually released some of the land that we own, which was very constrained, and now is a real development opportunity. So we're looking very closely there as well, bringing forward expansion of health, but also relieving some of our pressure on an overcrowded site at Byron Street. So across the board, a lot coming forward. In addition to that, talking with Peel and Wirral, our Maritime Knowledge Hub, and slightly further afield, a new robotic telescope on the island of La Palma. So if anyone's interested in that one, certainly give me a call.
Certainly got your hands full, haven't you, Mark?
There's a bit on.
Never a dull moment. I think it's interesting what you say about how this links to what Leah was talking about how about connectivity and how seemingly simple schemes can sort of unlock much bigger ones. Just before we move on to Mark Kitts, just had a question in from the audience for John, and it's just A simple question: when do you expect to submit planning for the old Littlewoods building itself? From Stephen McDonald. John, do you want to answer that before we talk about some of the other projects?
Sure. We actually have an extant consent which has been implemented for the main buildings. So that has already kind of been awarded and implemented, or we've commenced some elements of work on that. It will need to be tweaked slightly. So probably early in the new year, we will be kind of getting ready to submit a new application there. But it does actually have consent as it stands.
Right. Okay. Now, our other Mark Kitts, you've also had a very busy lockdown. You've helped to put together the North Shore Vision Heritage Planning Framework, and you're also working on a City Council strategy to regain control of housing delivery in the city. As I understand it, the role of Liverpool Foundation Homes would be scaled back, and an in-house council delivery team headed by you would bring forward new build homes on a mixture of tenures. Now, without too much sort of technicalities and sort of procedures, if you know what I mean, could you explain to us how this new model would improve the current process and what opportunities it would present?
Yeah, Sarah, thank you and good morning to everybody, and thanks for the invitation to be on this panel. Could I just say, first of all, that I'm really looking forward to seeing the product that Leah's bringing forward on behalf of the city, and also congratulations to Mark and John for the amazing work that they've done on the film studio. I mean, I was involved in that a number of years ago with them, and it's a great example of a public-private sector partnership come to fruition like it has, and sticking with the vision. I think that's a really important point, particularly in the current economic climate. So well done to you all. Housing is so important to Liverpool. It really is important. I can't underplay that in any way. It's got many issues. It's got such a diverse housing market in the city, and it's really integral to not only the city plan, but also the city's economic recovery, but also the city region's economic recovery. And the kind of bringing back of delivery from foundation homes into the city council was a decision not taken lightly by Mayor Anderson. And basically what it was as a result of was a change in government policy. So I'm not going to get into the technicalities of all of that, but when Joe Anderson set up foundations, he couldn't build houses fundamentally, without financial penalty, that is. And this change in policy basically allows the council to do so, but it also allows for financial efficiency, and basically it doesn't need two delivery teams. So whilst foundations will remain as a stock holding company and a landlord, and it'll be there for the council to use should it need to, fundamentally the delivery of houses from a council perspective will be done in-house. And I think what that does, it provides a focus for the delivery of new affordable homes across the city. And also, really important point, this one, a focus on renewal. I think that's something that's kind of been dodged for a number of years by government, to be perfectly honest. And it's good to see now that, to a degree, renewal is being considered not only as a component of economic recovery, because it's a good job creation type of activity, but also it's good from a climate change perspective, because of the potential to retrofit existing homes and to improve them in terms of the CO2 emissions, etc. So it enables the kind of council to focus on both of those and bring very closely together strategy and delivery, which is something that I know it's been keen to do for a number of years. And I suppose at this particular moment in time, I'm wearing two hats. I've worked for the council for 19 years now, and my 2-year secondment is about to come to a close. So I'll be picking up the leadership role within the council very shortly. And we're already working on a plan to hopefully deliver around about 6,000 homes over the next few years in the city. And that's a combination of new build and renewal activity, but it's also a combination of direct delivery by the council, and also the council enabling third-party partners to deliver on either council-owned sites or sites owned by other partner agencies. So that gives you a broad idea of where we are, and hopefully what we'll be delivering in the near future.
Okay, thanks so much, Mark. I think it's really interesting sort of next chapter for housing in Liverpool. So I'm going to pan out a bit now. Stephen Cowperthwaite, the schemes coming forward in Liverpool are obviously the product of, and they are influenced by, a range of economic and other drivers shaping the market. So what specific factors do you think are impacting development across the city at the moment? What are the key growth sectors and location hotspots?
I think, and thanks for the invitation. There's some great stories already that we've heard today. So I think just panning out, and it's probably quite timely today with the government potentially announcing a work from home preference as opposed to what we've had over the last month or so. And certainly what we've seen is that, that focus towards a more flex, agile approach in the office sector, with really a flight to quality, with health and well-being top of the agenda for people, reduced footprints and shorter term leases. And obviously that has an impact from a financing funding perspective. And across our big core 9 cities, a report last year, the average lease term was down to 4 years, and we expect that to move south again, over the course of the next 12, 18 months or so, as we see people want to have greater flexibility. And as I say, that does impact upon the ability to develop, going forward. But really what you need to see there is, higher rents as a consequence, and I guess a move towards more annualised rental increase as well to offset. And an example in Liverpool in terms of that move to reduce footprints is the BT requirement, which was originally 110,000 square feet, but we understand is probably going to be about 80,000 square feet. So, reduction to 80%. We advise RBS, it will undertaking a strategic review of their footprint nationally. And I think that's very much the same across, the broader professional corporate services, etc. And as part of that, we've implemented the Avison Younger cost containment initiative with a lot of our occupier clients, where we're looking at disposal of surplus space, service charge challenges, business rates, etc., all of which are major issues, for occupiers. But I guess what we've seen as well is where occupiers in, say, multi-let buildings are looking to downsize, where they're regearing leases to take short, smaller accommodation, resulting in longer lease commitments and higher rents. So some positive news in there from that perspective. I guess, again, some of the positives from a COVID perspective is that a lot of the more call center type operators, which may have overseas facilities, currently are starting to look at the impact of COVID and a movement potentially towards bringing some of those operations back to the UK. And I think Liverpool and the wider city region is well positioned to take advantage of that, and also, government relocations potentially as part of the wider levelling up agenda. So that's something to keep a watch on as well. And then I think, we've seen some great catalytic examples from John and Mark. We've been involved in Upper Central in the production of the SRF. And so if you talk about growth sectors in Liverpool, then plainly that health, life sciences, infectious diseases is an area where we've got real absolute strength as a city. And it's something that historically has probably been underplayed, but, you've got a thriving ecosystem with LSTM, the leading tropical medicine institute in the world, probably University of Liverpool, LJMU, the Royal. Great, fantastic world-class R&D facilities with the likes of Hartree, Centre City, Materials Innovation Factory, talent pool with, the number of people in jobs in the health sector, I think is, something like 114,000, and then graduates in health-related degrees as well. And then I think what you have to absolutely focus upon is that quality of life piece that Liverpool brings from a culture, and Leah's talked about it, place, public realm, and investing in that has got to be, an important part of the move forward. So I think lots of positivities in there, and plainly Upper Central, Paddington Village is a fantastic, chance for the city to redefine how the city looks over the course of the next 5-10 years.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. Thanks, Stephen. I'm just going to break for a minute or two to answer a few audience questions, which are coming thick and fast. Couple of procedural questions. Another one for you, John. Is the start on site at Littlewoods dependent on the whole 250,000 square foot being pre-let? Perhaps you can clarify that for our member of the audience.
No, good question. No, it's not. We have sufficient pre-lets as things stand. And just wanted to say thanks to Mark for his kind words. Mark played an instrumental role in Littlewoods at the very outset. So, you know, a serious credit to him for the role that he's played, and the city continue to play in the scheme as well.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you for that. And a question from William Baldwin. This is to Mark Kitts. Will Liverpool Foundation move forward with the consultants and contractors framework mentioned previously, i.e. the new delivery outfit?
Well, the easy answer is no. The Liverpool Foundation Homes won't be doing that, but the council may well do. That's a topic of conversation at the moment that we are just about to embark upon, not just within the council, by the way, but also with our city region partners. So we're looking into the possibility of putting a framework together of contractors to deliver renewal and retrofit activity across the LCR. So that is a topic of conversation at the moment, but no decisions taken as yet.
Okay, thanks. So one to watch. A question from John Roebuck. This is to you, Stephen. I think the talk over the last few years has been the lack of grade A office space in Liverpool. Is this still going to be a priority with the way the future work environment is now anticipated to change? You touched on this in your intro part. Would you like to tackle that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, as I said, that we are seeing a flight to quality, and health and well-being is an important part of the agenda from an office perspective. So I think absolutely, yes, we still need grade A office space in the city. We need Pall Mall to come forward, Liverpool Waters. In fact, over in Wirral Waters, they're about to spec build 25,000 square feet at Tower Road South. So, you know, I think that's a real positive for the city and the region. And we're seeing that in our towns around the regions as well, where there is some offices being developed. But 100%, you know, you look at Upper Central, then, you know, grade A office space and, you know, research and lab space will very much be part of that going forward.
Brilliant. Okay. So Mark Askham, what about John Moores University? How has COVID affected plans for your estate revamp? You know, it sounds like you're still extremely busy, but I wonder, what are your key considerations now? Have they changed at all? Are you planning to scale back or put anything on hold given the current market uncertainty?
Yeah, really good question, but a really hard question to answer. It's still, to be honest, still quite early to understand what the future really means. We're still, you know, we received increased applications this year from students. So student numbers are still really buoyant. The way we work is certainly being reviewed. I think from our initial plans, the ones I've set out earlier around Copperas Hill, Upper Central, and around sports and health, they're real growth areas, and we need new space in those. I think we will be committed to deliver those, and if, you know, on review we look at having less space for staff accommodation potentially with more people working remotely, we'd probably look at getting out of some of our older estate, which isn't really fit for purpose. Picking up on Stephen's point just then, you know, we're looking for quality space, we're looking for flexible space that can be adaptable. Some of the really, you know, quite pleasant old buildings that we have just don't meet those grades anymore. They've been suitable up until now, but you're kind of trying to identify spaces that are well ventilated, well controlled. Well, unfortunately, Victorian buildings don't necessarily suit that from an academic point of view anymore. However, you know, we are working and in conversation with various other people about what the suitable use might be, and actually making sure we've got an exit strategy, not just leaving parts of the city derelict again. You know, actually making sure we've got partners coming in And that's in all sorts of quarters. That might be the science park, it might be other institutions that could fill some of the spaces that we move out of quite adequately, but don't meet our needs. So no, we're still fairly confident that we will move forward with our plans as they are. We may need to review some of our exit strategy from some of our buildings though, as we go forward.
Okay, all right, thank you. Linked to this is something that Stephen mentioned earlier, or touched on, and that's the importance of matching some property development plans with job creation needs, particularly in high growth industries. John, obviously you guys are doing this, well, Littlewoods is doing this with the film and TV industry. How do you think developers then can work with councils to ensure their schemes can create jobs? What conversations have to take place? What are the things that you really need to know as a developer to make that work?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, that kind of collaboration between private sector and skills. You know, we're delivering a film studio. We can't just kind of plonk that down and assume that it's just going to run smoothly, because at the moment there is a skills shortage in that sector. It's a sector that's absolutely booming. In fact, as a result of COVID, you know, everyone's kind of chewed through the back catalogue of Netflix and Amazon Prime and all the other direct content creators. So actually, it's interesting, Stephen's point around, you know, bioinnovation and life sciences. It's a sector that's kind of actually done very well through COVID, in terms of, you know, it's obviously a point of focus, and film and TV is the same. It's a sector that is absolutely booming. At the start of this year, Netflix announced that they were going to spend $17 billion on content creation just in 2020. And since then, their market cap's moved from around $144 billion to over $220 billion. And obviously, they haven't been able to do any of that content creation because they haven't been able to get out and actually do any filming. So really what we're seeing is a massive backlog of demand in a sector that's booming, and we need more skills in that sector to be able to meet that demand. Otherwise, it's just going to be a missed opportunity. We don't want to import skills from elsewhere. Obviously, there is a sector in the city and it's doing really well, but actually, you know, Littlewoods equates to 4,000 jobs. So there is a need for more skills, and that's exactly why for us, LJMU were such a critical partner in this, that we wanted them on site, sat adjacent to the kind of private sector, to see what the skills needs are, and then to take people from the local area, upskill them and reskill them, and then put them directly into employment, either on site or as part of the kind of native crew that are needed to operate a studio. So for us, I think it's that combination of putting the private sector together with your skills provider in the same place. And when you have a look at the layout of the building, it's all designed around a kind of a central space in which you'll have students sat next to someone who's producing something in a soundstage, or someone who's creating a video game in the office accommodation we've got. And so you will get that kind of cross-germination happening in that central zone. And I think that's the kind of really exciting thing for me about this scheme is what it's going to do for the local population, and actually for the wider economy. It's 200 million a year in terms of gross value added to the city. So it is a truly transformational scheme, and that is only possible by having LJMU on site and able to kind of assist with that skills gap.
Okay, thanks, John. Leah, you've been doing some work, well, as part of your bigger sort of spatial strategy for Liverpool, some work on areas of deprivation in the city and sort of how to unlock economic growth in such areas. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we've been mapping sort of data on top of data about deprivation, about how people are living, on top of the access that those people have to public transport and the access that they have to local centres as well. And I don't know, it's probably incredibly logical, And it might be stating the obvious, but the people who live in the most deprived areas have the worst access to local facilities. So when you start looking at local centres across the whole of Liverpool, and you draw an isochron, so you know how far could you walk or cycle in 20 minutes? You see that the areas that have all the good facilities within their local centres, they're the areas that they don't coincide with the areas where all the deprivation is. The people who are living in the most deprived areas don't have great access to services. They're much more reliant on buses. They rely on walking and cycling, but they don't have great. It takes longer for them to get places. So really, I mean, what John's talking about is absolutely brilliant. I love the way that you're talking about this sort of synergy between people, but there's a sort of wider thing about the whole system and being able to get access across the town to Littlewoods. And it's not just about access to the city centre as well. There's access within our local areas that we really need to work on. And some of that can be quite simple interventions, but really it's about improving all the places. We're seeing in COVID that people are able to often staying more local. And what Stephen's talking about, where we've got our grade A offices in the city centre, and maybe that market's changing a little bit, and maybe we're starting to rethink how we use our city centres, and that they're much more places for, well, less frequent meeting perhaps. It's maybe offices are used slightly differently than they have been up to now. So we have to think about the way that we plan our whole city. So yeah, I think all of that's really interesting. I think I've worked doing quite a lot of transport planning, and I think quite often we've planned our cities around the commuter, because we're all commuters. We've all for years we've gone into the city, and that's how we understand people live. But a lot of people don't live like that, and we've seen in COVID people have changed the way they live their lives. But what we've done is we've really focused on the lives of people who have jobs and people who don't have other caring commitments. We need to start planning for the way that women live their lives, the way that people who don't have jobs live their lives, the way that people with caring responsibilities live their lives. So it's a lot more of a complex system that we need to start planning for. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity as well to start thinking around that, to try and make a much more equitable and fair city, so that all of those people in those areas, deprived areas, start having access to jobs like at Littlewoods and like in the film and TV industry, and we get better diversity. You get a better, we get a better range of people working in all our offices. We get better solutions because we're thinking about more people, and we can create a much more just city.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Leah. I mean, Mark, Kit, clearly there's a balance to be struck, and it relates to what Leah's been saying, between a lot of the sort of, in terms of responsible housing delivery, a balance to be struck between the sort of high volume student PRS schemes that have come up across the city and genuinely affordable schemes. How do you work that out, and where does the demand lie?
Yeah, I mean, what the work that Leah's doing is really interesting, and I'm really keen to kind of interact on that piece of work, because we are looking at a number of challenging communities on the edges of the city centre, where some of the issues associated with access to jobs, etc., is going to be really important. You know, we consider the possibility of redesigning some of those communities. But, you know, one of the points I made earlier on is the challenge of renewal. It's been dodged for a while, like I've said, partly because of government policy, of funding. And, you know, one of the key challenges associated with the kind of typology of houses in these communities is not only the age and the condition, and the layout, but also the ownership, and probably importantly aligned to those two key points is the cost associated with those. So for me, the value and the cost associated with those. So for me, actually providing some focus on those key communities has got to be a really important aspect of our work moving forward, because there is a market for homes in all communities across the city. Liverpool has got a very diverse housing market. As I said in the introduction, it needs houses from, you know, the bigger 5-bedroom detached, for example, to support the economically active in the city, to retain employers and employees, all the way through to providing homes for people who want to get on the housing ladder who can't for whatever reason at this particular moment in time. And then what you've got to do is balance that with, you know, the growth of the likes of the city centre and waterfront, where, Sarah, you mentioned the challenge that we have with, you know, the apartment market, for example. So for me, it's all about the city taking a leadership role in defining what its housing strategy actually is across that very diverse housing market, and supporting public and private sector partners to ensure that they deliver the right thing. You know, making sure that from an organisational point of view, organisations are robust, they've got good teams with a good track record, with credible people involved in them, all the way through to the funding sources. And I know this overlaps with the fractional sales issues that we may touch upon later, but you know, the credible funding sources with evidence of funding all the way through the scheme, not just at the start. So for me, it's all about demonstrating that leadership role and making sure that we can deliver what's right for a particular community, city centre or otherwise.
Okay, thanks, Mark. You mentioned it there. It was going to be my next question, so well preempted. But Liverpool City Council is currently working on this code to govern the high-risk fractional investment market. So, what would you like to see from this code?
I suppose I'd like to see improvement. It's a very simple word, but you know, unfortunately, the city, like many other places, this just isn't a Liverpool thing. Other places have been impacted by this, particularly in cities nationally and internationally, been impacted by this approach to the investment market in property in particular. And I think what I'd like to see are a number of things. I think, first of all, is some form of regulation associated with fractional sales, particularly the organisations that wish to use that approach. I think within the fractional sales report that the councillors concluded on actually went as bold to say something like it would ban disposals of council land to fractional based investors. And that is a bold move, actually. And I think for me, it's all about being really clear with the code of conduct that you'd want to apply to investors generally in the city. Obviously, we want to be a business-friendly city. We want to be welcoming of investment of all shapes and sizes. We want to grow the city as a result, particularly in a very difficult environment at this particular stage. But we've got to be wise to the fact that not all investment is good investment. And some of this is about learning lessons from what's gone on in the past. And some of this is about actually applying rules and regulations to the way in which things are delivered, generally speaking, either if the city has got a direct role to play, i.e. through a land disposal, for example, or whether it's enabling a scheme, you know, supporting a scheme from its kind of promotional perspective, or indeed whether it's even considering a scheme from a planning point of view, because I think we should be able to introduce the issue of funding and governance into the planning system as well. I know it's not planning policy, but we should be able to add that to it. So those are a few things that I'd like to see as a consequence of the councillors' move on this.
Brilliant. I think that's really interesting. I mean, Mark, you touched on these reputational issues that perhaps Liverpool's development world is grappling with at present, and we didn't spell it out, but you know, this is on the back of the Elliott Group foray earlier in the year. We've had the collapse of companies such as Signature Living Group, multiple schemes still in administration. And of course, we've had the arrest of the council regeneration chief last month. So rearrest, I should say. No charges have been brought, I should add. But Stephen, I'd like to get your view on this, these reputational issues. Why is this happening? What are the issues at play here? And how can the city respond in a responsible and sort of effective manner?
Yeah, I mean, I'm plainly not going to go into any details in terms of those specific situations there, but I think from a reputational perspective, and what I've referenced during the course of the summer is that you've had Legal & General and Bruntwood come together under the Signtech vehicle to make a significant investment into the city. So that shows you that a big institutional fund has got confidence to come into the city to invest and develop moving forward. So I think that's very important that we're attracting those kind of investors into the city and into the region. I echo what Mark has said about the importance of public-private sector partnerships that are truly collaborative and transparent as well. And I think that's important in terms of how we take the city and the region forward also. There are plainly issues, but I think the more that we can get good news stories like Littlewoods, like Upper Central, LJMU, providing that catalyst for that area, then that's a major positive in terms of changing the dialogue for us as a city, to actually say, this is a good place to invest. We've got some really strong civic leadership coming from the city council, with Mark and his team and Tony Reeves, etc. And this is a good place to come and do business as a consequence.
Okay, brilliant. Mark Askham, do you have any? Mark Gitz has his hand up as well. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind adding to that. Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Stephen, for your comments. I echo them completely. I mean, these issues will raise questions without a shadow of a doubt. And the important thing that we must do is face those questions and deal with them. And provide confidence to people who are interested in coming to work in Liverpool, or even existing people who work here and work so hard for the city, and that kind of factors down to the citizens and residents of Liverpool as well. And we've got to provide that reassurance that we're looking to do the right thing in the right way for businesses and investors. And without repeating everything that Stephen said in terms of all the good news stories recently, there are genuinely more good news stories than not good news stories. And it's important that we focus on those. And I think the other important thing to say is as well, there are an awful lot of really good, honest, hard-working people in the council and across the partner agencies in Liverpool who really do want to do the right thing and in the right way. And, we need to obviously deal with issues, as I've said, but we also need to look past them and forward towards a better and more prosperous future. And, that's definitely what we're in the game of at this particular moment. And, we will deal with stall sites all across the city, working with different partners and owners and trying to convert those into positive situations. It won't be easy, but we will deal with it. We will get on with it and deal with it. So I just thought I'd add a couple of comments from a council point of view whilst I had the chance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I was going to come to Mark Askham and just, and also you, John, our two sort of developers, as it were, in the room. Obviously, you're looking for development partners as well, Mark, but it's a tricky one, the idea of the sort of concept of greater regulation on the development industry. So from your point of view, how do you feel about that prospect? Would you like to see more of that?
Okay. I don't think, I'm not necessarily looking for greater regulation, no, but I understand why it would come in. I think, in fairness, when we are looking at development partners, we're going through proper due diligence from our own point of view. We're working alongside the City Council on several schemes at the moment. And I must say, actually, our experience of working with the City Council, whether it's Tony, Mark, any of the regeneration team, it's been truly professional, open and collaborative. And as a result, we're bringing an awful lot forward. And the whole Upper Central scheme is a combined effort between ourselves and the City Council, and hopefully other partners as well. I would say also, just reiterating Stephen's point, Legal & General obviously have come forward, but in our conversations, there are many other investors who are very keen to come forward and take some of the opportunities that the city are putting forward at the moment. Despite the bad news stories, those opportunities are still there and are still valid. It just, it needs a continual effort by all parties to continue to push the good news of our city, and the great opportunities and the people that are here. just picking up on some other points, the challenges we've had have always been, for the past 20, 30 years, is attracting, blue chip companies in and retaining our graduates. And I think, the scheme at Littlewoods, the stuff around Upper Central where we're linking it and Paddington with the universities helps to, gives opportunities for companies to see where the talent pool really is and getting access to it. And from our point of view, retaining our graduates in the city, and just that there, the city will grow by solving those two problems. And it can only be by everybody working together, whether it's through public realm, linking the city up so all the different areas work together. I think the Knowledge Quarter are doing a getting together now in a much more powerful way, with universities, the hospital, School of Tropical Medicine. And there's some really good conversations being able to happen now around how we work together over the public realm strategy, or whether, just working together to solve some of the inner city problems that sit on our doorsteps. So I think, whether it's regulation, I'm not really answering your question, I suppose. I'm not saying it's regulation, because I actually see that there's a real shift in attitude between all the institutions in the city. And it's come around. Possibly COVID has made that happen even faster in a positive way, because we've had to collaborate a lot over the last 6 months in order to solve a lot of problems. But I feel that movement's already there as a groundswell of positivity through the city. And these opportunities, whether it's Upper Central, Paddington, Knowledge Quarter, Littlewoods, or over on the Wirral, I think all of these will come forward now because the time is right for them.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Can I comment on that one, Sarah, as well? So obviously, your comments are in relation to regulation on fractional investment in the residential sector, which is obviously kind of a very specific sector. And I think that we need to kind of keep everything in context. That is one subsector of one sector of the property market in Liverpool. And actually, the City Council have played a fundamental role in Littlewoods and everything that's coming through there. And that scheme would not be happening were it not for the support, both of the City Council and the Combined Authority. So let's not kind of blow everything out of proportion. Yeah, there are issues and they do need dealing with, as Mark has said. But actually, that is not the full picture of the situation. The City Council, to me, are making all of the right strides in seeking to deal with, the lessons that have been learned through the situations that you've mentioned. And actually, I feel very, very positive about the direction of travel there. And actually, looking at the news stories that are coming through in the city, there's a huge amount to be positive about. So let's not kind of choose to focus on that and just come into actually that subsector itself. There are structural issues with the overseas fractional sales market, which go beyond Liverpool. It's not those structural issues apply whichever city that is going on in, and the reason for that is you've got a delivery method for residential which is totally divorced from the end user, because your apartment owner is overseas. He's never going to see the finished product. So as soon as the developer sells it, he's incentivized to go and value engineer the life out of that building. And so there probably wasn't any architectural aspiration in it when it went in the first place. And there certainly won't be by the time it gets delivered. And actually, the person that's going to live there has been given no thought whatsoever in that whole process as to the quality of life, their experience in that apartment building, and we won't touch that sector. But the issue for us is, if there are other people in that sector that will, then we're always going to get priced out. So there's some great buildings in Liverpool which we haven't bid for recently, because we didn't want to just go into that and be up in just a foot race on price, where the person who can pay the most for it is the person who can spend the least on it in redeveloping it. So for me, it's got to be about incentivizing developers to do the right thing and to sell to owner occupiers, or to kind of bring in, an institutional investor to do a BPR scheme, and not just about disincentivizing that kind of small subsector of the market.
Absolutely. Thanks, John.
Can
Stephen.
Yeah, I'll just come in on that because I think John's absolutely hit the nail on the head that, you know, this is about putting people and communities at the centre of decision making going forward, and quality is absolutely, you know, central to that, and that's not just from a residential perspective, that's across everything, you know, from offices to retail to leisure to how we go about, you know, repurposing our town centres. Is that the community has to be central and pivotal to the outcome. So I think, you know, a move forward in that direction is absolutely what we need. So, and how we do it, whether it's a code or just encouragement or just getting better quality people doing stuff in the city, then that's a positive thing as well.
Brilliant. Okay, I'd like to ask Leah for her thoughts on sort of a related part of that. But as we're sort of approaching the end of this panel session, our allotted time, there's a few audience questions that we have yet to answer. Now, there's a couple actually for you, John, sort of factual points. People are very interested in the ins and outs of what's going to go on with Littlewoods, which is great. This is one from Peter Cummins. What is the preferred procurement route for Littlewoods, LGMU's planned developments and Liverpool City Council's North Shore vision, which we will discuss in greater detail in the next session. Do you want to start with that, John, and then we'll come to you, Mark?
Yeah. Hi, Peter. Yeah. Very happy to kind of pick that one up with you. Obviously, we are kind of just working towards that procurement piece on Littlewoods. So at the moment, we're still kind of working through the details of how we're going to procure that. And I can't really comment on the rest of LGMU's estate or the North Shore. But can I just quickly, whilst I'm on that, can I just deal with the planning piece that was mentioned in there as well? Because I just want to clear that up.
Sound stages.
Yeah.
Yep.
So is it a good question from Stephen McDonald there about the pop-up sound stages? Just want to clarify, they are nothing to do with Capital Centric or Twickenham. So that is the City Council's own development. It is a temporary facility and it sits adjacent to Littlewoods Studios. It is not part of the studio development, but it is there to kind of facilitate the market in the city in advance of the main studios coming on stream. So it's there to kind of assist getting film on site quickly in the city whilst we're working through the development of the main studio. So it is a completely separate thing. So hopefully that clears that one up.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. Mark, did you want to pick up on the preferred procurement route question?
Yeah, I mean, again, I can't go into a huge amount of detail on all the schemes we're talking about, apart from, you know, we're talking about long-term developments. So we'll be looking at partners, and whether that's a development partner with funding or whether that's looking at contractors and consultants. We will be looking at longer-term engagement plans with them in order to make sure that they get to know what we really want and therefore can roll out a series of projects with us rather than just single one-off appointments. Looking forward, that's our preferred approach.
Great, thanks, Mark. I had another question from David Morris. This is about Greenbelt release, and Leah, I wonder if you want to tackle that with your sort of public realm sustainability hat on. This is with the drive, need / desire to work from home. Do the panel agree that a more aggressive Greenbelt release policy should be part of the answer to deliver more green space and increased footprint?
That's an interesting one, isn't it? I don't know. I mean, we've got to an aggressive Greenbelt policy. Oh, Greenbelt release policy. I missed the word release there. I think we have to try and reuse and renew a lot of what we've got in terms of the space we've got. We're in the middle of a climate emergency. Everyone's declared one. We have to. I think we have to try and use our cities, the bits that we've already done. I think Liverpool is blessed with a great deal of public space, which is very sticky. I don't know if you understand what I mean by that, but it's places that it's not just places you're drawn through. They're places that you want to stop and spend time with in. And I think, you know, the city centre is absolutely full of that. It's a really good place to hang out and want to be. And I think that's good. But maybe a bit more greenery would be a brilliant thing. It is a good thing in any city. Yeah, so Mark's got his hand up.
I mean, we could, feel free to, finish your point.
Yeah, I mean, just very briefly from me, we probably in Liverpool anyway, I can't speak for other places, but in Liverpool, we probably don't need a more aggressive green belt release policy. I mean, it depends what we mean by green belt. I mean, there are lots of different kind of stages of green and open space, all the way from your incidental plots that were probably once brownfield land that have been grassed over and have been turned into incidental green spots, all the way through to green belt, and you're bypassing the likes of listed parks, gardens and cemeteries within the city. And to be perfectly honest, I think there's a significant amount of brownfield land within the city and also incidental green space that could be used for, I'll call it housing development, but when I talk about housing development, I'm also incorporating into that the likes of the placemaking conversation that Stephen and Leah have talked about already. And, I genuinely believe that if we take a kind of a holistic, overarching view on certain communities and certain spaces within Liverpool, we can improve the place far better for the residents without having to eat into formal green belt within Liverpool.
I'll just come in on that, Sarah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think this ties back into that town centre conversation, doesn't it? Is that, we know that our towns have, too much retail in them, that they need to be repurposed. As Mark and Leah have already said, there's brownfield land available that we should be looking to repurpose and actually build the right housing in the right locations for people and of the right quality as well. So it's that blend of housing and different, whether it's built to rent model or for sale model. So it's a variety of different ways where people can engage with those properties as well. So I think absolutely we can change the dynamics of our town centres by looking at how we can introduce more residential into those locations.
Leah,
maybe we have more. We use our local centres and create sort of more kind of dynamic hubs, so that you have a place, because not everyone will have a place in their home to work. That's what we've seen. We've seen people living in their nice detached houses, their gardens, having a really lovely time in lockdown, and people living in one-bedroom flats struggling. But maybe we need to use some of those, some of our local centres to provide that workspace for people, and then have a city centre gathering space. So just rethinking what we've already got. We've already got quite a big footprint of brownfield and already built. So this repurposing conversation is really, really interesting. How we can use what we've got in a more effective way that people can have a better time.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, it slightly relates to a question from Maggie Mullen. This is for you, Stephen. Any movement with a revamp and overhaul of landlord/leasehold arrangements to free the high street up? Free it up, I guess, rejuvenate it and help it become more prosperous.
Well, I guess we're still operating under the 1954 Act, isn't it? And an awful lot has changed in the intervening years. So, I mean, it's quite interesting in that context. You are seeing more flexible models coming forward from landlords, where they're providing white boxes to get people in on temporary arrangements. Obviously, a move to turnover leases. There's still the traditional model of a rent and yield, but I mean, I think it all ties back into how we value property. And again, we probably value property the same way we've done for 100 years plus. So that things do need to change how we look at properties as assets, and actually having a regular turnover of tenants that keeps a centre fresh is a positive thing. But in a conventional rent and yield model, then it's prejudicial to that kind of thing happening. So, and then again, you've got the whole CVA issue. So New Look last week getting turnover rents through the back door, and plainly that's not a good situation. I don't think so. Yeah, I think you are seeing a move in that direction. Absolutely, we need to change the shape of high streets. A great example, I'll give a shout out in terms of the city centre, is what Queensbury have done with the Met Quarter during the COVID lockdown, because I think the deal with LMA to repurpose 50,000 square feet within the Met Quarter and bring 500 to 600 students into that space will make a huge difference to that as an asset. And it's that kind of imaginative thinking that we need in both city centre assets and also town centres.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks, Stephen. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, folks. We've gone 1 minute over, so a virtual round of applause to our speakers for a really brilliant conversation. I think we covered a lot of ground, and to our attendees for your questions and input. And sorry we didn't quite get through all of them. I think we got through most. Could I ask you to stay on for the networking break, and we'll be back for the second half presentation and panel at 11:25. Let's now switch to networking mode. Thank you so much, everyone, and see you shortly.
Good morning, everybody. Just going to share my screen. Bear with me. Great. So yes, hello, everyone. And my name is Mark Graham. I'm a director at LDA Design. Great to speak to you this morning about some of the work we've been doing in Liverpool. Particularly, I'm going to talk to you about the Baltic Triangle SRF, which is a bit of work we've been working on for some time with the City Council. Be remiss of me not to mention some of our partners who've been working alongside us on this. So Jones Lang LaSalle, Mark McDonald's, Authentic Futures, and DS Emotion worked with us to create a framework for the Baltic Triangle area of Liverpool. LDA Design have been working primarily as urban designers, master planners, and landscape architects for some 40 years. About 2 years ago now, we established ourselves in the northwest from our Manchester base, and working with Liverpool in Liverpool since then, and had the great pleasure of working with some really key partners in the area. I think really importantly, this piece of work is really framed by the community interest group corporations within the Baltic Triangle. So that's the Baltic Creative and the Baltic Triangle area alongside the City Council. They really provided great insight in terms of the stakeholders and the businesses in the area, but also the creative energy and ideas that we needed to shape this plan. So for those who know the Baltic Triangle, they'll know it's an area of many different facets and pieces, and I think balance is the key driver of the work that we were doing. Balancing the quality of life for people who live there and work there, ensuring the prosperity and sustainability of the growth of the area, in terms particularly around its creative and digital sectors, whilst also retaining that character and identity of the place. And I think that was the real challenge that was given to us by the City Council, to create a regeneration framework that really encouraged growth, but the right type of growth in the area, so that the future was sustainable going forward. So this is the piece of work we're doing will supplement the local plan. This is the vision statement that was put forward in the local plan, really focusing on creating a creative and digital industry with an independent character, and building on what is there at the moment, and particularly related to its heritage, which obviously frames some of the discussions we'll have later in our panel. Alongside what we were doing, the local CICs developed a manifesto for the area, and that's essentially an 18-point plan for the future vision of the area. And I've picked out some of my favourites there on the right-hand side, which really struck home in terms of how we framed our SRF, and we've focused our planning and design for this area. I think what that document and that manifesto concludes on is around "and things will still happen," and I think that's an incredibly important piece of the jigsaw for the area, that it can't stagnate, it can't stand still, it needs to grow, but that growth needs to be characterful, needs to be sensitive to the area, and that was really the challenge that we gave ourselves going forward. So just a little bit about the area. It's an area of huge contrast. There's creative industries, there's student housing, there's high-rise apartments going in there, and then there's a burgeoning nightlife as well, which all bring challenges and opportunities with them. The area's character and heritage is incredibly rich, and places like the Keynes Brewery and the Heaps Mill on the left and right there, grade 2 listed buildings, which bring huge amount of asset to the city. But then there's also lots of local heritage in terms of the small building there in the middle, which isn't necessarily treated in the most sensitive manner, as you can see there. And I think what we try to do is focus on not just the pretty old buildings. It was about the streets and the places there as well. So this is the Ackermann's plan, which was drawn up in 1847, and it shows the Baltic Triangle as it was grown from, and in terms of its industrial and trade history. Obviously, the Baltic Triangle comes from its trade with the Baltics, and it also has links to the slave trade, and hence the Jamaica Street in the name of some of the key streets there. So it's got a really rich and varied history that we wanted to bring out in our SRF, that, you know, ensured that it was about the people and the streets as well as the buildings itself. And then there's a really interesting and creative, vibrant reuse of the area. So that obviously the creative itself, and another really interesting reuse of really great architecture. And then there's opportunities for change, and that change is happening. It's happening at a fast pace, and hence the need for the SRF to ensure that future growth is done in the most sensitive and well-organised manner. There is a number of residential proposals in the pipeline in the area. There's creative workspace with opportunities to expand, and then there's a burgeoning local student population with the UTC there as well. So huge opportunities, huge challenges, and this SRF was putting that forward. So we engaged with the local community to shape the content, and we set out 5 key objectives. We wanted to define the area through its streets, really importantly. Grow the creative and digital industries within the area and allow them to grow within the space, and allow them to grow with the place as well, ensuring that there was space for them to thrive. Alongside that, ensure that the area was built for communities. There's a challenge at the moment in terms of very mono-focused residential growth in terms of 1- and 2-bed apartments. We wanted to ensure that there was opportunities there for a mixed tenure, so families could grow there, for example. Focus on a quality of life, and then that last point around is distinctive identity. That the Baltic Triangle is known throughout the UK in terms of its things like street art and the nightlife and the creative industries there. So we wanted to ensure that that was first and foremost in our thinking. So we set out 6 spatial drivers for the area. First was around re-establishing the grid and that panorama that you saw earlier. How we reimagine them streets to bring that back. Establish gateways and connections down to the riverfront in particular. Define an area of character. So what we've proposed within the SRF is a potential conservation area for part of the Baltic Triangle, to focus on that. Create a network of quality spaces, and whilst there isn't an opportunity for a major large public park, for example, there are small opportunities for really high quality pocket parks and public spaces which could be linked together, and we've proposed some of them in our framework. And then the creative and digital heart, and ensuring that there was a real area there for creative and digital businesses to thrive. So we've defined a creative heart of the area where the primary use should be around creative and digital businesses, and that is written into the policy. And then finally, around connected communities, the area is surrounded by some really challenged but some really vibrant communities within the city. We wanted to ensure that what happens in the Baltic Triangle and its proximity to the city centre really provide opportunities for them through connections and through regeneration opportunities. So this is the framework plan that we've put forward, and which has been well received by local community and been shaped by the local community and the CICs. Essentially, it establishes a real network of high quality streets, public spaces that frame sensitive growth that is of varying density, but is of a sensitive density. Real opportunities for a mix of regeneration, but also the creative reuse of existing buildings and streets as well. So just delve into a little bit further in terms of some of the detail. We've essentially established 3 pillars of growth throughout the area: Baltic streets, Baltic spaces, and Baltic places. The streets was around really reconnecting the urban grid that has been lost through overdevelopment or the closure of streets. So we wanted to open that network up, and we've created what we call Baltic corridors, which will connect through and across the area to create a really interesting and vibrant space. We created a street framework, which will be used as a planning tool for the area to create real distinction between the street hierarchy, encourage movement, but also encourage activity. So we've established a category of streets which is based on movement and place, and the balance between them two. And that has been used to create positive scale throughout the area. There's good and bad examples of street enclosure throughout the area, and we wanted to ensure that growth coming forward is really based on what impact it will have on the streets and the public spaces to ensure that vibrancy is maintained across the area. Just some visions around the type of streets that we're looking to create. So this is Simpson and Flint Street, what we're calling a creative street for makers and for vibrant activity to happen throughout the area. And then this is Jamaica Street, which is more of a connection street, but ensuring that there's a real balance there between moving people through the area and creating real activity across that street. Spaces around creating really vibrant and active play spaces and places to congregate and dwell, and places to be creative as well, which I think is incredibly important for the area. And finally, we created Baltic Places, which essentially areas have changed. So there's 4 areas changed. The police HQ in Heaps Mill to the north of the area, that's a really key gateway into the Baltic Triangle. A really important piece of the regeneration of the area in terms of a mixed use, leisure and residential. Wapping Tunnel, which is a large surface car park at the moment, that provides real opportunity for a central neighbourhood within the area, creating a mix of family housing and apartments, but also embedding creative uses and businesses in there as well. Flint Street is an important landmark corner as it comes up to Parliament Street, and we've defined a residential regeneration opportunity there. And then Cainsbury Village and the Hill Street is obviously building on the success of Keynes Brewery and what happens there at the moment. There's an opportunity there as well for the reuse of St James Street Station, which will create a Baltic Triangle train station, which obviously improve connection to the area and provide opportunities for further commercial activity, but also embedding some mix of residential and family housing in that area as well. So I think probably most importantly that this forms part of a wider regeneration action for the city, the number of SRFs which we form part of. And then as Leah covered in the first part of this session today, it was the public realm strategy. So we've been leading that with the City Council, and the real focus of that is around ensuring that this regeneration is brought forward in a cohesive and positive manner. So there's a real vision for the city framed by this regeneration opportunity. So we've been working with the City Council, and we've been lucky enough to work across the city. This public realm strategy will cover the whole city and then focusing on the city centre itself, creating a real focus around people first and human facilities. So these are some of the strategic objectives we've established, and really these are really fundamental to the future of the city and how it grows and how it grows in the most positive way possible, and in a really distinctive way as well. I think there's a huge opportunity for Liverpool to do something very different with the heritage and movement opportunities that it has. So I'll just conclude on that. Probably one of my favourite quotes from Yangel in terms of, and I think it applies really well to Liverpool, and there's an opportunity there to stay for the party, I think. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing that, Mark. Really interesting and a great overview to help inform our next conversation as well as consolidating some points from the first as well. So our next panel discussion asks, where next for Liverpool's heritage regeneration? So I'd like to welcome to the stage Greg Dixon, Director at Planning Consultancy Barton Wilmore, Erica Rushton, Creative Economist at the Baltic Creative Business Hub and other regeneration projects, Claire McCulkin, Director of Culture Liverpool, Mark Kitts, Chief Executive of Liverpool Foundation Homes, and Mark Graham from LBA Design will stay on for this panel as well. Hi, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
Now, I noticed there's been already a question for Mark, so please do keep your questions coming. I'll start this next panel and we will certainly get to your questions, Stephen McDonald, that is. So if everyone's there, if you can activate your cameras and mics if you haven't done so already, which I believe you have. Now, to give a heads up, Mark Kitts has to leave this session soon after midday, so please feel free to duck out when you need to, Mark. Heritage is a hot topic in Liverpool right now, so this session will try and really get under the skin of the importance of culture and heritage to the city's physical and economic development, and how to balance conservation with growth. So starting with you, Mark Kitts, you're chair of the city's World Heritage Site Steering Group, and you helped to write the North Shore Vision, which was published this month, and it aimed to guide development across, I think, about 260 acres of protected dockland. And it comes on the back of, well, lots of things, but one of those is UNESCO's warning last year that it might remove Liverpool's World Heritage Site status. So, Mark, can you tell us a bit about the impetus behind the document? Why is it being produced, and what will it do?
Thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for the introduction as well. I mean, you know, Liverpool it's a great city. It's always been a city of innovation and change. It's very dynamic, and I see this as a real statement of ambition by Liverpool. And you know, the place has always been a place that has been changing over the years. Buildings have been built tall for many, many years now in Liverpool, and they were pioneering tall building technology, I'm sure, as most people remember. And a similar situation kind of accords itself with dock technology as well. And many of the city's most prominent buildings, indeed the one that I'm sat in today, the Canal building, was once a former dock. And I think it was tall buildings and dock infill issues that kind of presented Liverpool's World Heritage Steering Group and Task Force with the challenge that UNESCO set, not just 12 months ago, but a number of years ago, to be honest, because Liverpool's been on the World Heritage Site in Danger list since 2013, when the city approved the Liverpool Water Scheme back in the day. And in effect, you know, the reason why Liverpool is on the in danger list is because of the approval of that scheme, and because of the perceived overdevelopment, particularly in terms of tall buildings, but more recently in terms of the practice of dock infill, as I've already suggested. And I think the quandary associated with the fact that Liverpool Waters and parts of North Shore form a major part of Liverpool's World Heritage Site are also cognizant with the fact that it's also one of Liverpool's greatest regeneration opportunities. I think the North Shore area, as you've said already, comprises about 260 acres of brownfield land opportunity. You know, one great opportunity is controlled in the main by one major landowner, which is Peel Holdings, who have a extant 30-year planning approval to deliver a £6 billion regeneration project. But in addition to that, the kind of 10 Streets area is quite different, really. Not because it is already of mainly built form, but also because of its very disparate land ownership. I think there are somewhere in the region of 120 different landowners in that particular area. And, you know, what the city needs to do is grow its economy. It needs to grow its economy in an inclusive way. And the Inclusive Growth Plan and the recent city plan, and also the city's economic recovery plan submissions, you know, they place firmly and squarely places like the waterfront and North Shore, very important in terms of that economic growth agenda. And this whole document is an attempt to demonstrate to UNESCO that the city needs inclusive growth in places like North Liverpool, but it also wants to do that in a sustainable heritage development focused approach. And, you know, my great belief, and this is the belief of the task force and the steering group, is we can actually achieve economic growth in this area, as well as retaining our World Heritage Site status. So that's where it's all come from. And I think, in effect, you know, what this is all about is trying to create a relationship between the likes of landowners, investors, developers, and I'll call them kind of end users, maybe residents in some cases, or businesses in others, to make sure there is a real people and community focus on decisions that are being taken by, you know, in some cases, large organisations. But in taking those decisions, those organisations are encouraged to apply the use of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and their own historic urban landscape development principles. And by doing that, in effect, there's a collaboration at the earliest part of a a project's evolution being considered far in advance of it reaching the planning table. And that allows for a far better project coming through the system and eventually being developed. And the key things that obviously I'd be looking to see, and obviously I don't want to quote every sustainable development goal, but things like equality, and poverty and hunger and dealing with those things, and sustainable energy, clean energy, all of these things are really important. And, you know, it's good for me to be able to say at this stage that, you know, not only is this a statement of intent, it's also a real life situation, because we're working very closely with Peel Holdings, who have incorporated the collaboration manual, which is part of the North Shore Vision, and are working with development partners and investors are using this as we speak, and we're starting to see the benefits of that already. But there are other aspects to this as well, and you know, that will be the conclusion to the city's local plan, the public realm strategy that Mark's already talked about. And also the tall buildings policy, which is going to be fundamental to the City Council's planning policy framework moving forward. But, you know, I think one of the final things I'd like to say is, whilst this started off as an exercise to address UNESCO's concern, quite clearly it is this statement of intent. But it's just as applicable to Liverpool and its regeneration, even if the city does lose its World Heritage Site status, because the whole concept of sustainable development and some of the things that I've described are actually good practice, and we should be doing that kind of thing anyway. So hopefully that gives you enough of a feel for where it's come from, what it's all about. And just a final plug, there is a website, northshorevision.org, if any of the audience want to have a quick look whilst they're online. Okay, thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Mark. Really helpful, I think. Now, Greg at Barton Wilmore, as a planner then, what's your response to the vision? There's certainly been, you know, plenty of controversy lately in Liverpool over schemes such as the zip wire, which has now been rejected, got Everton Stadium, which Heritage England has now opposed. So does the framework go far enough to address some of these contentious issues around development and heritage in Liverpool?
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Mark, for giving a very comprehensive introduction. I'm not sure I need to say much more in many respects, but I think one of the key things this document and vision does, it's not a planning development management tool which planners like me get excited about on a daily basis. So I think we should set it as a, you know, in that sphere, that it's a vision, it's intended to guide discussions. The fact that there's engagement and debate going on in relation to this document right here, right now, I think is positive. The council's obviously looked at how it responds to all of the challenges it has with its World Heritage Site status and projects that are coming forward, such as the People's Project. As Mark's alluded to, it covers Liverpool Waters, but also Stanley Dock and 10 streets. And I think one of the key points that comes from it is this ability to deliver renewal and growth in a harmonious way that brings together regeneration and also heritage assets at the same time. As we know, there's been a lot of work undertaken, and the waterfront's already changed a lot since the 1980s, especially with various regeneration and heritage-led regeneration projects coming forwards. But we've also got to recognise that those port-related activities that started and were the historic baseline for this area of the city have long gone. So we need to look at how it transforms. And that's set against, as Mark's already alluded to, those challenges, both socially, economically, and environmentally. The environmental one being significantly the heritage assets that sit at the heart, and how do you repurpose many assets within many different land ownership, albeit Peel have a key role to play at that at the heart. So I think what's positive is that the vision doesn't set out and isn't overly detailed at this stage. It acknowledges that there's already been progress undertaken, that they're part of the way along the journey, and projects are already either completed, as per the Titanic Hotel, which is a great exemplar of what the area could be moving forwards. But obviously, clearly, there's a need for more of those and more of those types of schemes coming forward. And also, regeneration frameworks are in place for the likes of the 10 Streets area already. So it's evident that there's further work that needs to be undertaken. Everyone acknowledges that. I'm sure UNESCO would be favourable, and that I've already seen lots of positive feedback. The challenges from my perspective and from a planning point of view is it talks about a new balance and layers of the city in a historic landscape. We worked on the Cambridge Village project during the planning stages for the Baltic Triangle, which sort of gave a bookend to the south of the Baltic Triangle. It's how we continue to look at bringing forward and how the city truly engages and responds to projects that push the boundaries, really, as the People's Project has done. I don't think anybody questions or challenges really the use that's brought forward by the People's Project. It's all about matters of design and how those matters of design integrate with what is really a signpost for the city, being on the waterfront and being key to everyone's perception of the city moving forwards.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Greg. Claire from Culture Liverpool, I'd love to hear your views on the subject of heritage as a development hot potato. What are the advantages culturally of World Heritage Site status, and what are the drawbacks? Does Liverpool really need it, do you think?
Well, I would kind of disagree that it is a hot potato. I mean, the city has spent over 900 million in the last 10 years on heritage. And for me, heritage and culture are intertwined. Culture is moving stories, and it's the way that we tell our stories to a wider world, and heritage is a place where you view those stories and you feel those stories, whether it's in the streets or in our buildings. And just to kind of put a bit of balance in, I think probably if we look through in the last 10 years, kind of the buildings that we've restored, that we've regenerated, the landscapes that we've created in the city, from the Royal Court, Central Library, the Sterling Prize winning Everyman Theatre, the Philharmonic, the bombed out church completely refurbished, the Town Hall, Lister Drive, the Reader in Calderstones Park, the Blue Coat, and finally Prince's Avenue, which is was completed this weekend. I mean, they're buildings that have a place in a city's story, both in its past and in its future. And I think the way that we've supported those buildings, whether it's joint funding them or it's encouraging other people to go for European grants to kind of finish them off, is completely exemplary, actually. And I think it's really interesting with me because culture, Liverpool is known internationally for its culture. We've got an exceptional reputation. You know, other cities emulate the work that we've done, they look at the work that we've done, and heritage, it's kind of got this kind of mixed response. And actually, if you look at the actual facts around how the city has invested in its heritage over the last 10 years, the facts kind of speak for themselves. And the beauty of this city and the stories that it tells when you walk through its streets are there for all to see. And I think that, for me, the more interesting thing, and Erica can talk about this much more eloquently than I can, is how we do regeneration and actually how we involve those stories of people's lives and the future stories of our next generation's lives into the fabric of our city. And that's why, you know, the Prince's Avenue story for me is really important. You know, literally the words of the people who live there are under your feet, are in the stone, are there forever now. And the work that Erica and others have done on Granby Street started with a creative heart. And I think we talk so much about regeneration and no one has mentioned the word artist at any point during any of this conversation. The best regeneration in this city has started from artist engagement. Whether you look at the work that happened around Anfield with the biennial and the artists, the start of the work around Homebaked and that area. If you look at the work that Erica's done around Granby, if you look at the work that happened in the Baltic Triangle, they were started by artists. You know, they were artist visions working with communities to draw out those stories of place. And I think we've got to stop seeing heritage. In some ways, the word regeneration is an old word. I think it's quite an old-fashioned word, actually. You know, because our job, all of our jobs, whether you're working in development, whether you're doing what I do, is we're creating a city for a next generation. And the only way that we will do that well is when we recognise that the most beautiful, the most sensitive, the most impactful work that has happened over this city over the last 20 years has had creatives and communities working together at their heart. And when you take those away from a picture, you end up with kind of developments that can be anywhere. And that's not right for Liverpool. And I think what I'm really proud of over the last kind of 15 years is the fact that Liverpool's identity is so strong and so brave and so different. And I think for us moving forward in terms of regeneration and development, that's what's really exciting. That collaboration between artists, creatives and developers is completely the way forward. And I'm really excited about that.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks, Claire. Erica, as Claire said, you've worked with the stakeholders of various cultural regeneration schemes. So how, from your point of view, how can it be done effectively while also boosting economic growth? You know, so an element of heritage preservation together with economic growth.
Yeah, well, I suppose, I mean, picking up on some of what Claire said, it's not the what, it's the how. If I use just for a moment technology as a sort of equivalent of development, we learned quite quickly that it's not the hardware in tech, it's not the cabling, it's not what computer you've got that creates value, it's content. And so I think I spend a lot of my time creating content for buildings, because no matter how beautiful your houses are, if they're either in an area nobody wants or they're too expensive for anyone to afford to live in, then they have no value. And I know when Mark and his team started doing the Baltic Triangle master plan, and I absolutely get why Mark and the planners need master plans, but I'm no fan. You know, they rang me up and said, "Oh, don't you want to preserve the heritage integrity of Baltic Creative?" Now, Baltic Creative, we did after the last global crash. There was nobody campaigning to stop us doing anything to what are a bunch of 70s tin sheds. They have some heritage value as much as any other 70s tin sheds. What we managed to do there was anything we wanted, because nobody at that point in time cared or was watching. And so that freedom to be playful and creative and invite people in was really, really powerful. And I suppose when Claire refers to how I do things, all I do is invite people in and say, have a go, you know. And I think it's disappointing to me when I read a master plan, a framework, whatever, and realise that the bit that talks about regeneration is addressed to developers. Developers do the hardware, but it is people who fill those buildings, who risk taking out a mortgage, who risk starting business. It is them who takes the risks that enables that development to become occupied. So just turning to heritage, and I've spoken pro and against the saving of buildings. I would say, if you want to save a heritage building, find a purpose for it. And if you can't find a purpose for it, put it on the back burner or don't bother. So I think it's about, well, let's have a look at what works. When I go and put a call out, I've done 2 call outs recently, but they always tell me the same thing. If I put a call out in Liverpool for people who want to start a business or grow a business or have an idea that can go in a building, actually the city's heritage dictates who comes forward. So if I use the sort of North Shore example of that, the people who came forward, first they looked at the buildings and realised it wasn't a second Baltic Creative, because the size and scale and the kind of making that had gone on down the North Docks was what they responded to. They responded to that city's heritage with their own inherent skills, which are passed down through generations. At the same time, I would put the call out in Salford, around an old textile mill. In Liverpool, I got makers and fabricators and people who wanted to construct bicycles and trading stuff and gaming stuff, because that's the kind of city we are. In Salford, everybody came forward with textile ideas. So our inherent skills, DNA of the city, will determine its future. And it's never what we expect. It's the gems are in the unexpected. The gems are in, you know, the 4 street runners who came up with an idea to teach others how to chuck themselves around buildings and now get 800 to 1,000 kids through their doors every week. They need a building. They cannot find a building that suits them, and they're grown out of the industrial unit they're in. They're a perfect use for a heritage building. But somehow we need to make our master plans and our content connect much better than they do.
Brilliant. Thank you, Erica. I think that's some very strong points there. Mark, Graham, this must chime with you, given everything you've said about the Baltic Triangle and how you put that together and the importance you placed on the local art and the local communities. Can you talk us through a bit more about that, particularly some of the challenges you faced? Was it easy to draw out that people element, that sort of that culture element into a planning framework?
Yeah, I mean, not at all, to be honest. I think the attraction of working on the piece of work we worked on was that we were inherently moving into a place that was full of creative people. You know, as you said, Claire, the plan that we produced was shaped by artists and creatives in the local area, and it was really trying to shape their vision into something that could be implemented through planning. You know, not being a piece of work that was restrictive and, you know, put a moratorium on new development. It was about the next piece of development is what can it have the most positive impact on the local area and the local people. And I think it's important that the piece of work we produce doesn't just focus on creative industry. We're focusing on a mixed community that'll enliven and ensure the kind of sustainability of the area going forward, but does protect its character. I think there's a risk there of making the area quite vanilla in terms of what it is at the moment. You know, it's a very attractive area because it's got industrial heritage, it's got interesting people walking the streets, and we're trying to create a framework that'll ensure that, you know, them streets are filled with really vibrant and interesting people that want to be there and engage with the area. So I think, yeah, both the points are really, just maybe really important. Just a point on the heritage piece, and what we try to do through our SRF and also the work we're doing on the public realm strategy is not see it as a restriction. I think there's a huge opportunity that comes from heritage in terms of being creative in your design response. You know, there's plenty of examples of cities throughout the world where you get a fairly bog standard or a fairly homogeneous design response to the buildings that come in there. And I think heritage ensures that designers approach it with a sensitive and creative manner. And I think there's huge, you know, Liverpool's an amazing city, a fantastic city, and very attractive in terms of people visiting it. But there's also an opportunity there to make it very attractive for investors and visitors coming forward, so that you create something very different, a different offer to make it sure that it becomes that kind of global city offer that it sets out to be.
Mm-hmm. Erica, how has the framework, over and above your own view about master plans, you know, your own sort of reluctance with them, but how have the cluster of creative businesses at the Baltic Triangle, how have they actually received the master plan? And I suppose, picking up on Mark's point about future opportunities, we've had a question here from the audience from Stephen McDonald. New ground floor commercial units have been built under apartment blocks in the Baltic. How can we fill them with businesses? So I wonder about your views on those 2 points.
So taking that first one, and I welcome lots of what's in the master plan framework, but I think it follows the point Claire made, which is a very traditional approach to regeneration. And that's no doubt what Mark was commissioned to do, and I've had a go at Mark before about it, and he knows me all too well. But I think if I look at the things that, and this is just my opinion, I think were absolutely critical to success in the Baltic. One is that the Baltic has been chaired from the outset by a board made up of 50% women. We were collaborative, and all the studies and research that has gone on in Baltic has pointed to the level of collaboration that existed. And remember, we entered a world that was, we had competitive strategies at the time. It was all about businesses needing to keep their ideas to themselves and be competitive. And we went, you know what, we don't believe in that. We don't think that's right. And so subtly and quietly, the culture of collaboration has permeated through Baltic. And that is key to its success. And the people who helped that permeation happen were a bunch of women, both the artists who originated activity down there in Jane Casey's kind of 2 fingers to the biennial, because they wouldn't show local artists at the time, right through to my chair in the board for 10 years, back now past to Fiona Armstrong-Gibbs, who served on that board throughout that time with me, and 4 or 5 other women who were really important in chaperoning that through. The other one is ownership. Baltic Creative is a community interest company, and therefore any profit it makes is reinvested. It is not trousered by any of us. We are a voluntary board, and our staff are paid reasonably well, but not ridiculously so. And we reinvest that in animating and activating and caring for the area, and in growing the businesses of our tenants and the property portfolio to be owned by that community, for that community, forever. And I think there's a big question, not just facing Baltic or North Shore, but the city as a whole. There's a really interesting book called Who Owns Our Cities? And I know local authorities are under real pressure, and we always look to them for property, but I think we have to come up with some more interesting models of how we navigate relationships with private ownerships and developers too. So if we've got 17 million going in to build capacity towards capital and centrics development down at Littlewoods, is the 17 million's worth of community ownership or equity return coming back from it? So it's that kind of thinking is about how do we make sure that our economy recycles itself and is not dependent again on that kind of big notion of inward investment. You know, through this pandemic, an awful lot of the big people in our economies we realised they didn't even have 3 months resilience within them. That is not a strong economy. And actually the people who traded through this were our entrepreneurs, our family businesses, our social entrepreneurs. 70% of the region's smaller businesses have traded through the pandemic without government grant or assistance, or with some government grant and assistance, or without. But that's a resilient economy when your risk is spread across many smalls, not when it's all in one big saviour of the economy. So I think we're looking at, as we look forward, we have to imagine the kind of world we want to live in and put our money there, because we've got choices about where we put our money. And if we put it all into the subsidy of 2-bed apartments that people have to spend 2/3 of their money on to rent when it would be far cheaper to buy, or we put it into making sure that the people who haven't got wealthy parents can afford a 10 grand deposit. We spread.
Sorry to stop you there.
Right.
I'm just aware before we come on to the Q&A bit, because I know Mark has to go in probably a couple of seconds, I just wanted to give him an opportunity to comment on any of the chat, because we've broadened out the conversation quite a bit beyond the North Shore vision document. I wondered if any of what was being said particularly chimes with you in terms of learnings.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I love a challenge. That goes without saying, and I will find a new word for regeneration at some point. But I think a lot of the things that Claire and Erica have said in particular about the approach to change and positive change, I'm really pleased that the vision that we've produced kind of strikes a chord with that. It kind of provides an introduction to it. It doesn't provide the answers at all, but what it does, it encourages that connectivity between, all stakeholders who need to be involved in delivering that positive change that's required in the city. So from a North Shore vision perspective, I'm pleased that it probably addresses some of the points that have been picked up. And I do agree. There's been massive investment in the city from a heritage point of view. I've been involved in many of those schemes myself and secured funds for them. And, the city, Liverpool will always be a heritage city, whether it retains its World Heritage Site status with UNESCO or not. But like it or not, we are governed by process, unfortunately. UNESCO's process is, it's a step above UK process. The way in which UNESCO interact with planning policies across Europe are so different to the way that UK planning policies actually play themselves out. And, to a degree, because of the difference in culture, difference in understanding between players across international domains, you have this uncertainty with regards to where you reach a positive solution collaboratively. And I think for me, if UNESCO do decide to take Liverpool off the World Heritage Site list, it won't be for want of trying to retain it, first of all. It won't be for want of trying to do the right thing, which is clearly something that we've done very well at over the last few years. And it won't be for the lack of trying to collaborate. So for me, I'm pleased with a lot of the comments that have been made, and thanks for asking me to be part of this.
Thanks so much for being here, Mark. I'll come back to you, Erica, if that's okay. I'm just conscious that there are a few more questions, actually. And I want to bring Greg in from a planning perspective. There's one from Nicholas Atherton here. Will the Everton Stadium be a threshold moment for the scale of buildings being given planning permission along the waterfront? What are your thoughts on that one?
It's clearly a signature project, isn't it, for the city, for Everton, and for the North Shore, and it will change and transform that area. And I think one of the key points that's come from this discussion is, no doubt that will have impacts in heritage terms, but do we not need to be grasping some of the opportunities, and then how do those opportunities play out to the people and the communities across North Liverpool and into the city? So I think this is obviously a key challenging project for the city at the moment. There is a lot of debate, discussion and dialogue ongoing, not only with Historic England, but with UNESCO and other parties. And the North Shore vision is part of the debate and part of, I suppose, the reaction to that. So I think there's positives that are coming. It's a much more positive scenario to be considering Everton Stadium and that's being delivered in the city rather than nothing happening in this part of the city. I think the interesting point around planning and regeneration, Mark helpfully drew upon all the proactive work that the city's been doing, whether you like regeneration frameworks or not. They have been proactive in seeking to bring forward frameworks for various neighbourhoods or districts across the city, whether that's down in the Baltic Triangle or up at the upper north area where we've been involved with LJMU. And I think what that brings, whilst some of it might not be welcomed, it gives the developers confidence and interest in what the city is likely to support there. But I completely agree that there's also the communities and the people and the smaller businesses that play a role and are key to crystallising that change, especially in smaller heritage assets. They're generally the people that can bring about niche change. And I also think it's worth flagging that whilst some of the change can be instilled by the City Council, at the moment there's lots of national change going on through planning. So I was working on a niche high-end restaurant in the Rope Walks area of the city not so long ago that was actually refused by the council because they weren't in favour of it. Recent use class changes would mean that would now be approved without planning permission. So, it's a constantly changing and evolving piece. The national planning regime is about to change again. How much of the current white paper gets taken forward will be seen. So the city has a key role in it, but sometimes the rug can be pulled from beneath its feet by changes to reform at a higher level. So it's all of these mechanisms coming into play, and I completely agree that local people have as much of a role to play in that as major national and local and regional developers.
Greg, what do you think to this other question from Stephen McDonald about what do the panel think UNESCO want to be built on the North Docks?
Probably retained as it is, with something that is more, let's say, backward looking in terms of where the North Shore got its heritage from, in terms of something that probably relates back to its heritage as a port. That's generally, I think, where our heritage experts start. How do you respectfully and enhance an asset without having an impact? I think across such a large area, it's inevitable that impacts are going to happen, and it's trying to ensure that the public benefits that derive from that are going to outweigh those impacts, and that the right assets can be crystallized and also cherished as a result of something that does result in change. So if the stadium results in a number of buildings surrounding the stadium coming forward for alternative use and being actively used in accordance with the way in which the structure exists today, is that ultimately a bad thing, or is that a good thing? Because at the moment, it being sat there continuing to sit idle can't be a good thing for the city as a whole.
Absolutely. Okay. Claire, another question for you, and it is actually more of an introduction. It probably should be my first question to you, but can you tell us what Culture Liverpool is doing to support and grow the city's cultural offer with all of these points and conversations in mind?
Well, we obviously haven't mentioned COVID yet, so we're in a very odd position. We cancelled everything in March, the whole city's cultural offer, which 47% of the city's business rates come from the visitor economy. That's huge for a city. 270 million go back into the city's coffers from that particular sector. They are absolutely on their knees at the moment. So as a city, we moved very quickly. We created recovery plans for each of the different sectors. We developed a project called Without Walls, which we love, which is shutting off Bold Street and Cattle Street, very simply buying restaurants and bars, chairs and tables to get them out on the street, to get them able to get up and running. You're a small restaurant, the last thing you're going to be thinking of when you've got staff to feed and people to pet and all of that stuff is getting your tables and chairs out on the street. So we did that for them. We're obviously waiting to see what government say in a couple of hours, but it's going to be an absolute other seismic knock to a sector that basically, you know, pays half of what we do as a city. So our job over the next kind of few months is to keep thinking about ideas to cradle that part of the economy as we come out of this, and to get back to March the 20th when the cruise liners were coming in. You know, international visitors were spilling on the streets, the city was buzzing, the students were all out, and we need to get back to that. But as a city council and local government, we need to work on a way to make sure we don't lose the best of what we've gained over the last 10 years during these next 3 months. So I think the crisis is really interesting, because I think for the last 6 months, as Erica said, you know, fleet of foot organisations, they got up, they started delivering, they were doing takeaways. It was like a rolling ball of kind of creative thinking on how coping. It's not going to be the same over the next 4 months, because it's harder and it's winter and they're tired. And I think as a city council and, you know, developers and some of the bigger organisations in the city, the universities, our partners, we need to cradle this city over the next 4 months, because it's going to be really tough. That's probably it at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, Claire, do you think perhaps we should save the sort of planning policy point for Greg, but what would you like to see in terms of sort of policy and maybe more funding initiatives as well to support this sector, so that it can really play its role, its sort of fulfill its whole potential in kind of regeneration as a broader term?
Well, we're looking at, so culture is very different. So lots of our culture is on the streets. So it's our festivals, it's our big events, you know, it's the stuff that is free for people to go and see, and that creates the atmosphere on the streets of our city. But a load of our organisations are based in some of the most historic buildings in the city. I reeled them all off earlier, but they're part of the heritage of this city. You know, Philharmonic's it's probably 176, probably got that wrong. It's about 176 years old now. You know, they're part of the story of this place. So we can't afford Hope Street, for example. You look at the development of Hope Street, there is no way the trajectory of Hope Street has not gone in the same way that the quality of work that's happening in those buildings has. So the quality of artistic content goes with development, which is why the whole Knowledge Quarter is kicking off brilliantly, you know, and all of that is because you've got the most incredible street at the heart of this city that has got culture as part of it. So we've got to do a couple of things. We've got to get those organisations open safely when it's safe to do so and when government allows us to, and we've got to kind of think of ways of sustaining a vibrant culture offer under very different circumstances, when there's going to be less money, but there's going to be more need than ever for these organisations to be vibrant. 38,000 people in Liverpool are employed by the visitor economy. That's huge. You know, that is absolutely huge. So what I would like to see, well, one, I'd like to see streets that are beautiful, because I think that's what's happened with Bold Street. You know, the work we've done with Arup, you know, really choosing a quality kind of environment around it. We can do much more of that. It's a walkable city, so that is gorgeous. You know, the fact that you can walk around this city, that needs to be better. And I think we just need to keep coming up with creative ideas that keep this city on the trajectory that it's been going on, which has been amazing for those of us who've been here a long time. It's wonderful. And we're in a moment in time now where we've had a crisis. We're still in that crisis. It's not over. And this part, I think, is going to be the hardest over the next 5 months, to keep the energy, enthusiasm and passion of those small independents that make an artist and that make this city what it is.
Brilliant. We're rattling through this session, so I noticed we haven't got too long before it ends. So I've got two sort of main questions to ask Erica and then Mark. And then we'll see about Q&As. So, you know, do keep them coming. Erica, you touched earlier on sort of a potential complicating factor when talking about heritage and cultural led schemes is this sort of complex ownership pattern, which obviously affects the financing as well. And it also affects the sort of long-term stewardship. How can this be actually sort of overcome, particularly given the context of COVID, when long-term financing of schemes is going to be so much more important?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is complex at the moment. And I think the changes to, you know, it's very soon it's going to cost us to have money in the bank. It nearly does already. So everybody is keen to put their money in property. You know, it's there, it's tangible, you can see it, you can touch it, you can walk in it and out of it. And actually, by doing nothing, that property probably will increase in value. So I think that is a real challenge to how we stitch things together. But as far as I know, Baltic is the biggest asset owning CIC in the country. And we set out to prove a point there. And we proved it fairly well. I think we proved that actually community ownership could do something at scale. I don't think it's the only solution. And we've always taken the view in Baltic that we don't own the Baltic. We're one player amongst many landlords, and that mixed economy is a good economy, and that relationship between public, private, community ownership, individual ownership is a good one. So I'm not advocating any monopoly on ownership. I'm just saying consider ownership as part of the mix. I know when we were prepping for this session, Sarah, we talked about that the city is built on slavery. You know, and so to talk about heritage and ownership without talking about the manner in which Black people have been stripped of ownership systematically within the city, to talk about how women within any ward within the city or the country, if they are on their own, can't afford to buy a house on an average wage for a woman. You know, there are some really fundamental questions here. And as I said, you can buy a house for about $300-400 a month, but you can rent the same house for $700 a month if you've got 10 grand deposit. So I think we have to do some radical things. I think we have to decide what's our direction of travel. Where do we want to go as a city? Do we want a city in which, I don't know, I'm plucking figures out of an air, but in which a third of it is owned by people within the city? Do we want a housing market that is all about renting out to people houses they can't afford? Or do we want to leapfrog that as a very cheap subsidy to buying a load of stakeholders in the city? Do we want to give a load of people that 10 grand deposit so they can get on the housing ladder instead of forever being a renter and at the end of their lives being poverty stricken because actually they're spending most of their pension on a rent they can't afford? You know, that affects all sorts of other costs to the city. So I think we have to kind of think long term, not achieve it overnight, but decide where do we want to go, and let's use what resources we've got to encourage travel in that direction. Very famous economist called Mariana Mazzucato, who talks about directional investment. So where are we going? And let's use the little bits of money we've got to take us in that direction, particularly where it's public or community money. But it persuades developers to go with us, just as Mark and Greg in the plans they create persuade people to go in a direction. You can't police it, but you can persuade it.
Yeah, absolutely. Nudge it. Mark, I mean, this sort of follows on the sort of broader point. You said in your presentation, it's not just the pretty buildings. So in terms of the design and the planning of schemes, how do you wrap in public realm and connectivity aspects to these kind of complex heritage regeneration schemes? We've had a question that also relates to this, because it's saying the Baltic Master Plan looks good, but how important is bringing an active train station back to that part of the city? So perhaps you could wrap that into your response about connectivity.
Yeah, but I think it needs to make sure that it's all part of a very complex jigsaw. I think, as Eric has set out, you know, it's a very complex business regeneration, and there's always winners and losers. And I think what we're trying to do through these plans is essentially kind of create responsible places, that democratic places that, you know, people have a say in how they grow. it is done in the right way, and that there's a community benefit. And I think what we're trying to do is create communities, and that, from our point of view, that needs to be done through streets and spaces. So fundamental to our plan was around making the streets sing, and you know, make the community be at the heart of how they grow. And I think that's absolutely critical. In terms of the station, that is something that, you know, I think the CIC was very, very kind of supportive of. Reopening that provides real regenerative and commercial opportunity for the area, because it increases accessibility. I mean, the fact is that the Baltic is very accessible already in terms of its proximity to the city centre, but it is slightly seen as the outside of that kind of inner ring, as it were. So I think for certain areas, it's going to be very important if that reopens. It kind of stimulates some investment, it stimulates some opportunity that can be done in the best way. But it also frees up opportunity on the streets, because one of the key challenges of the Baltic Triangle is car parking. You know, businesses need it to varying degrees. There's an increased residential population, so that's putting more pressure on the streets. So providing a sustainable transport opportunity to add to more active travel opportunities allows us to free up the streets to do something as we're trying to propose. So it all needs to be a very cohesive approach to the regeneration of the area. So I think in short, it's not it's not fundamental to the future of the area, but I think it's a very important step down the line.
Absolutely, and I think perhaps a lot of what you've been saying could end up becoming easier then, as Greg said earlier, with the planning reforms coming to the fore, some of this change of use, and enable people to better repurpose spaces.
I think, and potentially yes, but I think importantly, that I think what we need to do is put frameworks in place that are very, flexible, that provide what we've tried to do is a correct framework that is based on ensuring that the future of the area is preserved and sensitively developed. If development is easier to do, it needs to be done with the right design parameters in place. I would say that, but I think that's what we're trying to do with this framework.
Absolutely. Got literally 1 minute, Greg, but you look like you wanted to say something to continue that point.
Yeah, it was just to round off really that I agree that Liverpool is a walkable city and that there are many benefits to that, but also as it's growing, especially if you look at the Baltic at the southern end all the way up to the top of the North Shore now, in terms of that train station and connectivity, if those areas are going to continue to punch their weight, if you like, for the city, then I think some new corridor train being key, as well as walking, cycling, is going to be important, because that transport infrastructure at the moment to those parts is somewhat lacking. And if the city is going to be truly sustainably connected, that's key moving forwards from my perspective.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Greg. So I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, everyone. We could carry on talking, but what a great conversation. Thank you so much to our speakers for your comments and views, and to our audience for your questions. We've covered a lot of ground, so I hope that the event has been really useful and interesting for everyone watching. Thank you again to our sponsors, Kia, Lexington Communications, Satplan, Caro Developments, and Clear Fibre by Telcom. If you enjoyed the networking and you want to give it another go, we have a further half hour, so you can stay around and chat to guests, you can share thoughts on today's subject, and you can arrange follow-ups in the other room. 2 floors of networking we have, so make sure you work the room. Our next Place Northwest event will be the Manchester Offices and Workspace update on 1st of October. You can register for this via our website. So thanks so much again for coming today, and we hope to see you all very soon. Thanks.